Hello everyone, Alexander Flores here, and welcome to episode 15 of Creating a Software Company. In this video, we're going to be taking some of our website functionality and putting it into a Lambda function, and then using API Gateway in order to call that Lambda function. So I currently have some functionality here under social profiles that's going to allow us to connect to Dynamodb and get some information on a specific social profile. However, I want to actually take that functionality and move it into its own Lambda function so it executes separately, and then I'll be using API Gateway to create a URL endpoint in order to execute that functionality. So a lot of this logic right here is going to go into a Lambda function, which will clean up the front end code and also make it so we don't have to specifically rely on the Node.JS server to handle this type of functionality. So I'm going to start off by going into my project folder and creating a new folder called functions. And then in here, I'm going to create a new folder called social-profiles. And throughout this project, I'm going to be listening for GET requests, POST requests, and DELETE requests. So I'm going to make a new folder called GET. And then in here, we're actually going to go ahead and start working on everything. So I'm going to navigate into there. Now that I'm here, I'm going to run npm init. So I added in some basic information, and then we're going to create a index.js file. And we're going to go ahead and open up index.js. So we are going to temporarily install AWS SDK. And I say temporarily because on Lambda, you're going to have access to this package by default. So I'm going to go ahead and install that. And then in here, we're going to import it. We're also going to gain access to DynamoDB. Now we're going to create the main function, so to speak, for our Lambda function. So exports.handler equals async events. And then in here we contain all of our logic. So event is all the information passed into the Lambda function, and then we're going to return a response just like a normal function. So I'm going to start off by going to the other file which has all of our logic and simply just moving this into our new Lambda function. So I'm going to cut all this code and paste it here. Now, obviously, we have to make some changes, such as request.primes.id. We're just going to simply say event.id, and I will be demonstrating how to actually pass information into a Lambda function soon. Then here we can say event.sub, and then here, instead of response.send profiles, we're going to simply return profiles. Now we're going to go ahead and write a function that will invoke this function here, because it won't do it by default on our local machine. Okay, so this right here is simply going to call the function and then print out the response. I have to pass in an ID and a sub. This is specific for my own use case. So this sub is going to be basically the username for my current Cognito user. So I'm going to paste that in. And again, this is just specific for my own application. Then the ID is going to be at start. Let's just say all. Let's go ahead and save this. And then let's see what type of errors we get. Okay, so this worked. In this exact use case, we are simply just going to pass in our account username basically, and then we want to get all the social profiles attached to this account. And in this case, it's just one, which is social dash, and everything seems to be working there. Now, if we change this to a specific social ID, social profile ID like this, then we can get specific information on just one. So let's go to DynamoDB and let's copy it from an existing entry. Let's copy this right here. Then let's paste it in right here and let's see what happens. Okay, so we get an error. And I think I made a mistake in some of my logic here, so I'm going to fix this real quick. Okay, so I went ahead and fixed this. There were some problems in my code. But now we see that when I am running a specific ID, then it's going to return some information here. And then this above test right here was when I was passing in all. So in this exact use case, they look the same, but if we had more social profiles, then all would return those as well. So now I'm going to comment this out, and I like to leave this commented out at the bottom of the code whenever I want to test it on my local machine. I can easily uncomment this. And now we have a working Lambda function. Let's go ahead and save this. Now in this exact case, the only thing I'm importing is AWS SDK, which we do not need to import on Lambda, because in the backend of Lambda, they'll give you access to that package by default. So there's no need to actually import it. So to save uploading time, I'm going to go ahead and actually remove it. Okay, so after removing it, I then put index.js and package.json into a zip file. In this exact case, we don't need package-lock. Now we're going to upload this zip file to Lambda. So let's go over to the Lambda tab and let's create a new function. I'm going to name this social-app-get social profiles. Profile. And I'm going to run node 8.10, and for a role, we're going to be creating our own roles in a moment, but I'm going to use Lambda default, which just gives me access to log to CloudWatch, just so I can check what's going on in the console logs. So all this looks correct, so let's go ahead and create the function. Okay, so we get a congratulations, your Lambda function has been created. We're going to scroll down and we can edit this code inline. Alternatively, we can go to the zip file, which I'll demonstrate how to do that. You just click on upload, select your zip, and then we can click save. However, there's a couple things I want to edit just from my own personal preferences. For the tags, I'm going to add company. I'm going to say social dash, which is the project I'm working on. Then I'd like to increase this to 5 seconds, sometimes 10 depending on how intensive the process is. But I like to go 5 seconds as a default minimum. Now let's go ahead and click on save, and it'll start uploading that zip file. It will happen pretty quickly. Let's create a test. And so we're going to call this all. And then let's go ahead and copy our tests from this file here. Okay, so I'll paste these in, and then let's go ahead and save this, and let's try it out. So we get an error, and this is expected because I haven't set permissions at all. When we're developing on our local machine, I have the credentials saved in a way where I have access to everything. However, in production, we're going to need to actually give access to scan and to get item, which we use right here. So let's go ahead and do that now. Let's go over to IAM, and we want to create 2 policies. And then we're going to attach those 2 policies to a role, which this Lambda function will have access to, and therefore it'll have access to use these functionalities on DynamoDB. So our service will be DynamoDB. We want to select only the minimum amount of requirements that we need. So I want scan, and I'm going to create 2 separate roles for this instead of creating one role that has both options. Just in case I want to use a specific functionality in another Lambda function, I can easily just attach this one policy. Now we need to set the table that we're going to be using. So let's click add ARN, and we're going to get that from DynamoDB. So this is the only table that we should be accessing with this policy because we want to provide the least amount of permissions as possible for security reasons. Let's then go over and paste this in here. And this should autofill some information here. If not, then you copied the wrong thing. Let's click on add, and then let's go to review policy. I'm going to name this social-scan social profiles. Let's create the policy. All right, now that we have this, I'm going to close out of this tab, and then we're going to create our other policy, which will give us access to get item. So again, we'll select DynamoDB. The actions will be under read and then get item. We'll specify the table and then click review policy. This name will be similar. Get social profile. Okay, let's create the policy. Now let's go over to the roles. And when creating a role, we're going to select Lambda because that's what we want to use our role with. Then we're going to search up social, and we see these 2 that we want to attach. But we also want another role I created, which is simply CloudWatch write logs, which will give us access to writing to the CloudWatch logs so we can see what our console logs are displaying. So we have these 3 roles. We're going to click on review. The role name will be social-get social profiles. And the reason why I'm naming it this is because it is the same name as our Lambda function. Now let's go over to our Lambda function and let's refresh the page. Okay, now we want to scroll down and go to execution role. We want to change Lambda default to social-get social profile, or whatever you named yours to, and then click on save. After doing that, we have to refresh one more time. Now let's go ahead and click on test, and we see that it worked this time, and we get the information we expect. So that is under this event right here where we have all. However, if we pass in our ID, again, this should send us back a similar result. However, let's create another one that has specific ID. Let's create the test and then go ahead and test it out. So this does return the same information. However, this is using a different method. So one is using scan and one is using get, which we see right here. So both of these work, so that means our Lambda function is working. So now we can go ahead and create an API using API Gateway and connect an endpoint to this Lambda function. So I already went ahead and created an actual API. So let's go over here and let's go to Resources, Actions, Create Resource. And we're going to name this Social Profiles. And we're going to enable API Gateway Course. Okay, now that we're here, we want to create a method. And we can use anything here. So when we go to use post or delete, we can do that. However, in this case, we want to use a GET request. Now we're sent here, we need to select our Lambda function. So we can type in social, and then this will pop up here. So let's select that one, leave everything else the same. Let's click on save, and we need to add more permissions. So let's click OK. Okay, now that we're here, we need to go to each of these four things and configure something. So we're going to start with method request. Request validator, we're going to select the bottom option, validate query string parameters and headers. And then we want to set some URL parameters here. One will be ID. And we're going to set this to required. And then the other one will be sub. And we're going to set this to required as well. So now that we have these two things, these we pass into our Lambda function through the events variable right here. And that's how we gain access to this variable and this variable. However, we still need to set up a little bit more than that. So let's go over to integration request and then go to body mapping templates. Select the middle option when there are no templates defined, which is recommended. And then here we need to add a mapping template. And this one's going to be called application/JSON, and it's important that you name it this and not something else. Then after typing that, let's click on the checkbox. And then now we have a field here. So once we're here, let's go to error and then go back to empty. So we have this starting point right here. Now inside this object, we want to define all of our variables that we set in the previous setting. And then we're going to be able to name them different things if we would like to be able to access them under the event variable. So we're going to say ID. This key right here is going to be what you're going to be able to access to in the event variable on the Lambda function. And then the value will be $input.params, and then in parentheses and in quotes, we're going to say ID. And this right here is the name of the variable that we defined beforehand. In this exact case, and also just a personal preference of mine, I like to keep them the same name to avoid confusion. And then we're going to do the same thing for the sub. And let's click on save. Now let's go back, and under method response, we want to add a header to the 200 status, which means everything's okay. We're going to say access control allow origin. Then we're going to click on the check mark here, and then now we want to set a value attached to that, which is under integration response, header mappings, and we want to edit this field right here, and we want to add in a star. And this will allow all domains to access this endpoint, not just specific domains. Let's save that, and let's go back, and then let's go to test. Now we're going to pass in an ID. Let's try all, and then the sub, which is this right here. So now that we have those pasted in, let's click on test, and we get the information we want. Now let's change the ID to the social profile ID, and this should return the same information. But we see that this is added here. So this seems to work. We can now go and deploy our API. We're going to deploy this to the development stage. Okay, now we get this invoke URL right here. Let's go ahead and copy this. And then let's go to social profiles, and we want to import a package. We can also comment this out because we don't need it anymore. So let's go over to that directory, and let's install request and request-promise. Then we're going to go ahead and import request promise, and then we are going to simply say await rp.get. We're going to pass in an object where the URI is this endpoint. And actually, we're going to make this have the variable where ID equals request.params.id. and sub equals request.session.sub. Then we're going to use then to get the response if it's successful, and we'll simply just log that and then also send the response back. And then we're going to catch an error, which will do a similar thing. We're going to log the error and then send the response back. Let's go ahead and save this. And we see that everything is working okay. So let's go ahead and try this. Okay, so now I'm going to click on this right here, which sends us to social profiles, which gives us access to call that. And we see that we now have the data being responded here. And so we know that this works successfully. And for clarification, this is being called in this JavaScript right here. So just when it's ready, we're going to call this endpoint, which is being listened to right here. Then we're getting the response, and we are getting the profile picture from all the profiles that were returned, and we're applying them to the social profiles div, which is a blank div right here, which is why we see this default profile picture. And so now we know that everything is working fine. And that's a basic implementation of how to create an API with API Gateway and connect it to Lambda. Thanks for watching.